Welcome to the Real Python Podcast. This is episode 10. Do you know someone in the Python community who recently was let go from their job due to the pandemic? What does the job landscape currently look like? And what are skills and techniques that will help you in your job search? This week we have Kyle Stratis on the show to discuss how he's managing his job search after just being let go from his data engineering job. Kyle is a member of the Real Python team and has written several articles for the site. We discuss Kyle's career and the skills that he's developed, which are currently helping him in his job search. Kyle left academia to work as a data engineer. His background helps him to communicate between teams of scientists and engineers. We also talk about Kyle's recent article on combining data and pandas, and he shares some tips on pandas efficiency and also hints at some lesser known features of Python generators. All right, let's get started. My name is Christopher Bailey, your host. The Real Python Podcast is a weekly conversation about using Python in the real world, interviews with experts in the community, and discussions about the topics, articles, and courses found at realpython.com. After the podcast, join us and learn real-world Python skills with a community of experts at realpython.com. Hey, Kyle, welcome to the podcast.
Hey, glad to be here.
I wanted to have you come on the show partly because I saw that you were let go from your job recently and you were looking for work. And I thought maybe that would be a good opportunity to talk about searching for work in general as a Python developer, but also just what things are like out in the world right now looking for jobs. I don't know if you can give me a little background on what's going on.
Yeah, sure. So on Friday, I was pulled into a meeting early in the morning that I actually almost woke up late for. I was like rushing into my workspace and 15 minutes beforehand, getting dressed and everything. And was told, because of the pandemic, I was going to be let go from my position. I was working at a computer vision startup called Affectiva that focused on bringing emotion AI to the world. And it's still a fascinating mission to me. I'm still, very friendly with everyone there.
Yeah.
Been getting a lot of support from my former coworkers and things like that, which is, one of the best things about working at a small kind of tight knit company where, we're all kind of struggling through a lot of the pains of being a startup together. But yeah, unfortunately, basically everyone that was hired on around the time I was, which was right after a big fundraising event, were let go. So a lot of brilliant scientists, engineers like myself, all were let go as kind of a plan to extend the runway.
Wow.
Yeah.
I hear about these Zoom calls. I don't know. I've just been kind of just looking on Twitter occasionally and seeing other people talking about it. And I feel for the people out there having to go through that, to be hoping that it's, something that it's just like an announcement of what's going on and it's totally something else,
Yeah. This was actually the first one in my career that I didn't like successfully dodge by, seeing the signs and getting out, because it's such a weird time. Like you don't really know what's going on, and they've been fairly transparent about things and kind of the financial situation, and it didn't seem so bad or dire. And then this happened, so it's kind of blindsided. I was kind of shocked, but the news was delivered with what I felt was a great deal of empathy, especially considering some other places I've seen how people were let go. Considering we were, I guess, an emotion AI company, there's a lot of understanding, which I think is kind of unique in a lot of the engineering space. A lot of focus on emotion and empathy and kind of understanding where people are coming from and things like that. So, all in all, it could have been worse. I'm thankful that I have kind of the network and people that I've known through my career and just in life in general that have really been there for me during this time, which has been just, mind blowing.
Yeah, I was wondering about that. Maybe we could get into a little bit of your background and maybe how that's relating to those connections that you've built up over time. You kind of have a little bit of a different background as a Python developer. You went to school originally for biology. Is that right?
Neuroscience. But yeah,
Neuroscience. Okay.
Yeah, similar thing. We're in a different department from biology. But yeah, so I've always been kind of an engineer at heart, but I was really interested, especially in college, about brain-machine interfaces. So I started in electrical engineering, didn't do well the first couple of years. You have the weed out classes. I was also just adjusting to life in college and having to study basically for the first time ever. I had like no study habits whatsoever. Very easily distracted by going to a school that was a lot of fun. I graduated the University of Florida. Go Gators. So
Sure.
it was a really good time. But, I struggled in that and trying to get into that flow. And then I realized, I have to switch. So I decided to get on the other side of the brain machine interface problem and look at the brain. So I switched into psychology, which at the time it was just, whether you want to do neuroscience, behavior analysis, therapy, social psychology is all in the same program. I was able to kind of tweak my classes so they're very heavy on biology and things like that. I was recruited into this lab for grad school, and for having kind of a more quantitative background, I worked with one other colleague who was actually had a master's in electrical engineering. And so I went through that. We're doing a good bit of coding, academic level, kind of that sort of dialect of coding, I would say. A lot of our equipment we had actually programmed directly. Our data analysis was all, we'd write a script to actually do the analysis. And that's where I kind of rediscovered my love for programming. I had started talking to a friend of mine that was working, I think at the time he was at a financial services company, his like first job out of college. And we're talking about, we're catching up saying, oh, this is how my job's going. What are you doing? He was telling me about his like 35-hour work weeks and his pay, and I was talking about my stipend and my 60 to 80-hour work weeks and things
Right.
like that. So
Sure.
I was like, wow, I think I need to make a change because these student loans are just kind of piling up at this point,
Yeah.
even with the stipends. So this friend of mine, who I'm still in contact with, he's come up to Boston with his wife, who they were dating when we were in college. So like close to both of them, they would come up and we'd visit. And they're in Austin, Texas now. He kind of gave me that first guide to, okay, if you want to switch your careers, here's kind of a path to doing it. And so for the next, I would say, academic year, I was just all in doing that on any spare moment I had. And this was on top of TAing classes, grading exams, grading homework and stuff, running a lab full time, writing my master's thesis, which I actually had to do twice over. So
Oh my
even
gosh.
more fun.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, it was just like, it was a lot, but if anything, it kind of made me realize like how much I could manage my time, shifting from that intense environment to an environment that's still intense, but it's generally a 40-hour work week. It was just like, it was very freeing. So he gave me this information that like literally changed my life. And I made it kind of a mission for myself to pay it forward as much as I could. I could never directly pay him back for that and basically all the advice and everything that he's given me over the years. I mean, I consider him my mentor because he's just, quite a few steps ahead of me. He's at Amazon now, has been there for quite a few years. What I decided to do was just pay it forward to other people. And I've had over the years, people wanting to know about my story. Like, okay, you came from like neuroscience and this, and now you're a coder. Like, what happened? And, how can I do this? So it meant a lot to me to be able to do that same thing for other people, no matter if it took like 3 or 4 hours out of my day sometimes. And because I was passionate about helping people, because I was helped and it was such like a big impact on my own life and the trajectory of it. And the reason I tell that story is that it kind of goes into why I have this. I hate to say network. It sounds so like clinical and businessy. I just really think of it as a group of friends and colleagues, which are most of the time one and the same for me, that act as this huge support network and that have helped me land on my feet many times. And, I hope that I've done the same for them as well. Going back to, kind of exiting academia,
Yeah.
I just started applying to jobs. Like, I think I applied to like 130, 140 jobs with very little experience.
Wow. That's a lot.
Yeah, just like a couple of undergrad classes I took in grad school and intro CS class sort of things, little projects and tutorials that I did. And like, I got exactly one callback. And, so I started working for this company in Tallahassee, Florida called Adirant. It was, my first job. It was, not the best pay, but it was my foot in the door. And I was just happy to be like sitting on like, oh crap, I'm like coding and getting paid for it. This is awesome.
Yeah. Yeah.
It was great. The downsides were that I was in my college rivals town. But other than that, it was really cool. I stayed in Tallahassee for about 4 years. I worked at Adirant, which was kind of enterprise CRUD software for law firms, kind of a client management system sort of tooling. Some interesting problems around like syncing and deployment across networks and things like that. A little bit after that, I was like, okay, I think it's time to make a change. And that was my first Dodge layoff, by the way. It was 2 months after that, they laid off almost all of their developers.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
Yeah. So like, I was just like, oh, wow. Like I picked up on something and I shifted over to homes.com, also in Tallahassee. And that's where I learned like about data engineering. I didn't even know that was a thing. But when I walked in for the in-person interview and I looked at on the whiteboard, they had kind of a diagram of the whole ETL pipeline that was the main focus of that team. And that powered the entire homes.com website and kind of all the related websites that they had at the time. I was like, okay, this is what I really want to do. It's, there's no UI stuff or graphical user interface stuff to worry about. Everything's really predicated on performance, uptime, logging into the servers, deploying kind of manually and all this. And it was a lot of fun. And that introduced me kind of to the world of data engineering.
Yeah. To take on that for just a second, can you talk about like what is ETL and what does it stand for?
Sure. So ETL stands for extract, transform, load. These are pipelines that basically the overall goal of them is to take one source of data, take all that data, do something to it and put it somewhere else. And which, sounds really simple, but business constraints that get put on top of that. And also kind of I don't know if constraints the right word, but kind of the environments you work in make it even more interesting. So you have to deal with a lot of data. You have things. So one of the business constraints was that we needed uptime like crazy. Homes.com, the way the pipeline worked is that our data sources were these independent MLS multi-listing service. This is like a real estate thing.
Yeah, sure.
All of these feeds that were XML, not standardized whatsoever. There are a few like different attempts that are all competing at standardizing their feeds. And so you have you have all these different styles and things like that. And all these MLSs will have overlapping listings and updates and things like that. So we have these like really interesting problems to solve. And I fell in love with that. Our pipeline would take in these like really messy data. It would clean it up, put it into a really nice kind of data model, put it out to different databases. So we got familiar with a few different database technologies. We were using MongoDB for some things. We were using various forms of SQL for the more relational data. We were using Solr for document storage and search. So we got to play with all these like really cool technologies. And then the language we actually used for the ETL pipeline was Perl, believe it or not. And this is, 20, I think I started there in 2015.
Wow, it's not too long ago. Yeah.
Yeah, they were still using Perl, but that was it actually happened to be the right tool for the job. I mean, Perl has some really powerful, text manipulation tooling behind it. So that was a lot of what we did. Yeah, I really just enjoyed that sort of thing and continued on with that. A little after that, I got married. Shortly after that, my grandfather passed away up here in Massachusetts, where I am now. And I kind of started working towards moving back up here to be closer to my grandparents and most of my family. Started eventually after, I think in 2017, started applying to different places, got a job up here at a health tech startup as a data engineer. But then I started doing also a lot of work with building kind of tooling around the various different needs of the science team that I was a part of. So we were like a small 3-person, first 4, then we went down to 3-person data engineering team as a part of the science team. So we were kind of that interface between our data that came in both from the website, and the other cool thing that PLM was doing at the time was getting blood data from people. So I was on a team of computational biologists, more traditional data scientists, traditional biologists that were used to like wet bench work sort of thing. And it was really cool being back in that very like academic setting. It reminded me a lot of the things I loved about grad school, with very few of the things that I couldn't stand about it.
Yeah. So you use the acronym, but it was Patients Like Me. Is that what it's called?
Patients Like Me. Yeah. So this is actually still around. They ended up being bought by, I think it was United Health Group.
Okay.
And so where it started was, it was kind of a website where people with chronic illnesses could get together and share their experiences. And what they started doing was having people fill out these different surveys that were clinically validated. There's a lot of transparency on why they were, collecting this data. It was purely optional. When we moved into the biological data collection, that was like a purely volunteer program, because these people wanted to learn more about, you know, their, they want to advance the science of understanding their whatever illness they had and were living with. And they also want to, meet other people that were similar to them and share their experiences. And there was a really powerful community that was built there. That was really cool. And so that's when I started using Python professionally. And I'd use it all the time. Like from when I started this whole journey, I'd been using it for projects and for interviews and things like that because it's such like an easy language to kind of rapidly build stuff.
Yeah, yeah.
But to me, before that, I had that stereotype of like, it's, kind of a rapid prototyping tool. That's about it. And then I got there and saw the stuff that we had built already in Python. And then I started building more and more complex things in Python and really started learning about the power that Python has that sometimes, especially then and the people I was around, like Python didn't get the credit for.
Yeah. When you talked about not only getting into Python, but you're also, as you're moving from role to role, you're developing this interesting set of skills of solving problems for these other domains that you were familiar with, the domains of, science, and being able to talk in the languages that those people understand and learning how that translates into your engineering background. Even though you didn't finish the program, that part, sort of stuck with you, and the programming sort of stuck with you, and you kind of translated to being able to work with data. That stuff's exciting to me because that's what I enjoy doing, like the problem solving part of it and being able to talk between all the teams within an organization.
Yeah, exactly. And that's where like my passion like exponentially grew. And I feel like at that position and again at Affectiva, there are these times, I think more generally, let's say, I think there are times in your career where you look back and it's almost like a light switch is flipped and you look back and you're like, I'm not that person and skill set, attitude, whatever. Like I always liken it to a video game, like leveling up.
Sure.
And like there's just like there's all of a sudden the sea change that just happens. And I definitely have felt that at pretty much all my positions. I mean, I think at homes.com it was discovering data engineering and understanding the potential that was there. And at Patients Like Me, it was being able to communicate between these teams and take more of a lead position on the things that were being built. So because we were such a small team, if something needed to be built, I was like, okay, I'll do this, and this is what I'm going to focus on for the next like 2 months or something. Looking back at that experience, well, I completely changed from my first day there to my last day, and then the same thing at Affectiva, and it's been an absolute joy to like go back and see that. Yeah, at that time, I definitely felt like there's this leveling up where I understood more about Python, and I realized like I had this kind of semi-unique skill where I'm conversant in the language of scientists in academia, and I really find that sort of environment enlightening and energizing.
Yeah, they're fun people to talk to.
Yeah, exactly. And like the amount of curiosity for everything that I've seen in like every academic I've ever met, whether they're working in industry or academia still, there's a certain type of attitude and curiosity, just like thirst for knowledge, wonderment at nature and things like that that a lot of people don't have. And I just find something super invigorating about it. So that's where I saw like that leveling up was like, oh, okay, I can kind of bridge the gap between scientists doing this like heavy R&D things and like more production engineering. Because going back to earlier when I was talking about like that academic dialect of code, there was a lot of that. And everywhere in there, I saw that at Affectiva too. There's, when you're rapidly building something because you want to understand the data and get the insights, you're not really worried about reusability or
Right.
readability after the fact. And you shouldn't be. That's not your job as a scientist. That's the engineer's job. And so I really found a good niche for myself, kind of bridging that gap. That makes things more difficult in the job search though, because not every company is looking to hire someone that bridges the gap between science and engineering. Most companies don't have a science team.
Right.
It's been a kind of double-edged sword in that sense, but I found kind of an area I really love to be in and love to play in, and I'm hoping to be able to find something kind of along those lines in my search now.
Well, the skill that you are building more than anything is just the ability to go back to the idea of solving problems and build those levels of communication to take the prototypical stuff that the scientists are building and turn it into structural things that are reusable and can become
Yeah.
parts of the machinery for the business itself. So just any of those kinds of projects that you can talk about. And I think it translates really well because in the end, as I think a lot of people are seeing, the language can change and can shift. And we both love Python, but if it's something where I need to work with a different type of tool, I'm willing to learn it. I'm willing to get in there and get familiar with it and find out what the new features are. Hey, there's this new database technology, what have you. And that's the part of it that, like you said, comes from a bit of the academic stuff, is the curiosity and the excitement to learn.
Yeah. And it's funny you mentioned like picking up different languages and things like that, because every job up until I came to Affectiva, before that, every single job I had was a new language to me. So at Adoran, it was C Sharp and the whole .NET framework. At Homes.com, it was Perl. At Patients Like Me, it was just kind of getting way deeper than I ever thought I would get with Python. Part of that too is like I actually love learning languages, human languages, and I think having that interest and that curiosity translates really well to programming because you kind of start seeing parallels to language features. So some languages I've worked on learning in the past. As an example, I like to use Japanese. When I was in high school, I was taking Japanese and Spanish at the same time, and I really like some of the features of Japanese. So like the particles that denote what part of speech the previous word was. And to me, I was like, oh, this is so much easier than like conjugating a verb. Or I'm also learning modern Greek now because I grew up around it. My family's from Greece, and my grandmother, unfortunately, is suffering from dementia. So, she's forgetting a lot of her English language skills despite being in the country since the late 40s.
Wow.
Yeah, so which is a common thing. So to be able to communicate better with her, I've been getting back to learning it, and it has interesting features, but they're also kind of difficult in that to denote the part of speech that a word is. A lot of times you're changing the ending, sometimes you're changing the stem too, and this is beyond verbs. Like you have to decline nouns and stuff, which is you have to remember so many different things. It has uses. Seeing how that feature in that language works versus particles as a feature in Japanese, it there's like so many interesting parallels with programming languages. There's a lot of overlap there that I think that if there are people that are interested in language and communication in general, like programming is a great thing to get into. I mean, Larry Wall, who invented Perl, was a linguist.
Right.
That's such a super important thing to understand and have an appreciation for. And I think the flip side of that, if you're a programmer, learn about some languages. You'll find a lot of really cool, like I said, overlap and analogies there that you might find really fun to play with.
I've fooled around. I had French in, I don't know, high school and a little bit in college.
Mm-hmm.
And then I realized I wasn't going to use it. And I was living in Arizona. So I'm like, okay, I should really look at Spanish. It's going to make way more sense. And so I started playing around in Spanish, and, I was surrounded by a lot of that culture in Arizona. And then my wife is from Hawaii. And so we moved there. We both didn't have jobs at all. We totally took a chance, but her parents were there. So I said, I really should probably have another language, and their Japanese is a huge one to learn. And so I started to dive into that, and it structurally is very different. So different from all the Romance languages, but
yes,
I didn't get too far. I ended up landing jobs that didn't require it. I have enough of it in my head that I can kind of think about it, and just even translating it into the symbols. And yeah, so I agree with you. Like, I think that's a really powerful tool to be able to translate into other things. It kind of brings me to this question that I tried to answer a little bit last week. It's basically about finding projects that were at the reading level of this particular person. They're kind of like at an intermediate level. And I think part of it is, I suggested that you need to find those areas of the language that you're having a hard time with, like decorators was one of the things for me. And typing and these kinds of things that look foreign to you, that look so strange. And then once you get that structural stuff under you, you can kind of build on top of it. Do you have suggestions for helping people like advance their reading level or finding projects that are at their own reading level in programming?
Yeah, I'm a strong believer in kind of getting out of your comfort zone. I mean, my whole career trajectory has been a story of getting way out of my comfort zone and just kind of putting your nose to the grindstone until it clicks. And I've been fortunate in that it pretty much always has, and it's been exhausting at times, but getting out of your comfort zone with that is always a help. It's to me, it's like working out or any sort of athletic pursuit.
Sure.
You need to do things that are harder, that aren't easy for you to actually grow. And your brain works the same way. Skills work generally the same way. So I would suggest, finding out projects that are beautifully architected. And it's hard to find those. Like you can't judge that on your own. You have to be a part of a community. And I think like the Real Python community is a great example of that. Getting on the Slack for the members and asking about it. You'll get a lot of great answers.
Yeah.
I love to use Wiley. Speaking of blanking on names, that's kind of my brand. So I can't remember. It's another writer on the Real Python team. They have a tool called Wiley, and I've always used it as like a blueprint for my projects. But if you find like really well written code, especially in Python, like Python's such a great language for this. One, it shouldn't be too hard to read. You'll encounter things that are going to be more difficult and out of your comfort zone, and that's where you're going to grow.
Yeah.
But yeah, if you're finding, what I would do is just like look out for mature, well built products, especially in an area that are interested to you.
Right. That's going to help because you'll stay interested in it.
Exactly. You want to know why it's doing what it's doing, and you'll have an idea of what it's doing. You'll start to learn the why and the how. But yeah, I have a strong belief in going way beyond your comfort zone and just trying to understand it, because you're not going to understand it at first. It's going to be super difficult. But when you start reading like more advanced code, or if you're learning a language, more advanced language, you'll start to pick up on things. You'll start seeing the patterns. And I think that can only make you a better developer or speaker in the language. It's just like how immersion works for language learning. You go to a country,
Yeah.
you're not going to be surrounded by really easy, low reading level, elementary reading level stuff. You're going to be,
Right.
there's going to be advanced language going on around you. There's going to be fast speakers. There's going to be signs with specialized language, but you learn the quickest that way. And I think that translates very well to code.
Yeah, it's funny. I was thinking about that. You always learn how to find the library and all these basic books, which is like, how often do you do that? So
yeah.
I was thinking, going back to your kind of journey, you got involved in a variety of different projects that are kind of a bit of side projects. And one I was thinking about was the one that was based around memes.
Oh yeah. Yeah, that's probably one of the most fun things I've ever worked on. So yeah, I can talk a little bit about that. Kind of going back to like kind of a guiding belief is that anywhere you work, you're going to learn a lot, but there's always going to still be room to learn more, kind of flex your wings, or learn something that you can bring back to your job, or you can start a project, build it into a business, and become financially independent or whatever, or destitute. It can go either way, really. So yeah, around actually right before I got married, that was October 2016. I started seeing I used Reddit probably way more than I should for my own mental health and all that, but I started seeing these kind of meta memes pop up everywhere, where people were acting like Jim Cramer on Mad Money, like buy this meme now, it's getting popular, or like get rid of this meme, no one's using it anymore, sell. And it was like such a hilarious concept, and I loved it. I was sometimes there's certain classes of memes that just hit for you, and this was one of them for me. And so a subreddit got made called Meme Economy, which is still around, where people, that was dedicated to just basically people role playing as if they were stock traders buying and selling memes based on how popular they were. There's a Discord chat set up, and I started talking to some people there that were like, you know what, we should take this joke way too far and actually build it.
Yeah.
And so one of them, like the day the subreddit was founded, he bought the domain NASDANQ.com, and I was like, that's freaking brilliant. And so, because it was the market for dank memes, so like a group of us started chatting about it and kind of coalesced. It was like 8 or 9 of us, and we're like, let's start building this. Like, I was using my data engineering experience. There was some designers, a lot. We were all avid gamers, so like we're making this kind of like a stock market game.
Yeah.
Think about like paper stock trading and stuff like that. It could be a really cool educational tool for people wanting to get interested in finance. And so we're like, let's do this. Like this will be a lot of fun. And so we started working on it, and we got like all of this media attention. So one of like the first articles on us was by, I think it was by Motherboard, which was a Vice publication. We started getting this attention from Motherboard. We had an article on The Verge. CNET interviewed us, and it was wild. And so we're like, okay, there's something real here. Let's make it realer. So we started learning about how to like create legally a business, and started thinking about how we could monetize it to keep it running, because the way we were building it was like super, it was pretty expensive to run out of our pockets. And so I started going to a local startup incubator in Tallahassee called Domi Station, and they had these classes, and I used their workspace, and really great group of people. And it was actually through that project I learned the power of your network and the people that you have in your corner, because I went through this class with this group of people that were doing all sorts of different businesses, and people were learning how to do like traditional restaurants, and there were tech people, there were apps being built, but it was a really fun environment to be in. And everyone was kind of out looking out for each other. And, still to this day, I actually was just talking to one of the people I went through this get starting class with, John. He called me up out of the blue, and I haven't seen him in a couple of years since I've, left Tallahassee, and he just called in with some like great words of wisdom for me going through this whole process of like losing your job and trying to find the next thing and all that. And it was really touching. But, that was where I first learned the power of networks and of the people that you do things for, or even just doing things for people in general. No matter how it comes back, it somehow always comes back to you.
Yeah, that's cool.
Yeah. And it's just been, in this particular experience now has been like a great validation of that. But anyways, to go back to NASDAQ in particular, we started building it. My focus was on kind of the business side and building the analysis engine, which what it did was is kind of like an ETL pipeline, in that it read data live from Twitter, Facebook. We're building a Reddit source and all that in real time. It was getting all these tweets and all that. It would search them for images that we were tracking. So we had a database with these images in it. We had this fuzzy search algorithm that we used because memes change, but they're still kind of in the same class. So if you think of like kind of the standard older memes that had impact font across the top and bottom, that font would change, but it was still the same image, things like that. So we had this fuzzy search algorithm that we used to find for matches in our database. Then we had it within that whole process. When we found a match, we had an algorithm that would determine like a popularity score. And then from that, we would aggregate all the popularity scores for a single meme that would determine its price in the game. And then on the front end, we had an actual like stock market you could go into. You started out with GBP or good boy points. So those were, which came from, that itself was its own meme. And so we had this game, and we had a community of people that were interested in it. I still get pinged here and there, like, hey, when's NASDAQ coming back? Like, we still want to use it after all this time. And so we started building it, got all this attention. I started through Domi Station. I started going around and pitching it to get funding so we could go full time on it. And unfortunately, Florida, I don't know if it's still this way, but the ecosystem at the time was kind of very conservative around, what kind of things they funded
for startup stuff.
Yeah, exactly. There's not a lot of like tech money involved, so not a lot of people understood the value of games, and also like how it could be transformed and used for other things. Because there's some different business cases you could approach with this technology. If you're looking at the conversation around images, well, ad campaigns, that's kind of a no-brainer, right? You can see how people are reacting in real time, how popular your actual campaign is beyond like kind of the traditional KPIs, especially if you're interested in shooting for virality on social media, which like everyone is still to this day.
I think of the most recent thing with as Bloomberg, right?
Yeah.
Bringing all those people to create memes for him.
Yeah, exactly. And there's a really cool ecosystem there with meme creation, and also usage. There's a whole field of study on it that predates internet memes. I mean, the idea of a meme is kind of a general concept of a mutable artifact of culture, and the internet has only accelerated that. And so it's a really interesting space to be in from a nerdy academic standpoint, which is where I kind of come in. And also just from someone who uses the internet way too freaking much, like myself.
Right. Sure.
But like the frivolity of it is what drove the interest, because we were like, let's take this way too far, this stupid joke, and make it into something. Unfortunately, we weren't able to get the funding for it, and it kind of petered out. I'd love to get back to it and rebuild it and modernize some of the things that we did. But as of right now, it's unfortunately not in the cards. But from that whole experience, and this is why it's another like kind of guiding philosophy for me is always build things. I learned stuff that was directly applicable to my job, specifically in using MongoDB and the aggregate queries that it has. I was able to actually use that knowledge I used in building this to go back and say, hey, we have this. One of my coworkers was having an issue. This is at homes.com. Was having an issue with a query that was taking that just it wouldn't finish
Wow. Yeah.
this whole process. When we actually calculated out like how long it should take theoretically, if it could run for that long, it would have taken 140 days for something we need to do every week.
Oh my gosh.
So,
Yeah, that's not going to work
yeah,
out.
so was not going to work out at all. So I used some of the tricks I learned in building the analysis engine for NASDANQ, and I was able to eventually. And I have an old article from like I wrote it in like 2017 on my personal blog, kylestratis.com, about how I actually went about solving this problem. Because it's like, oh, I think I have an idea of what I can do to handle this. And so I used these aggregate queries. We were able in this kind of like stage sense. So we do one change and see an improvement. We do the next one, see an improvement. Then we'll hit a roadblock. Okay, we need to kind of re-architect the data. And we had a measurement kind of on our side to where we could go to management and be like, hey, if we redid how we were ingesting this data, then we could get this query to run a little bit, we could run it faster. So we went through this iterative process. And I think after about I think it's like 6 or 7 rounds of it, we were finally able to get this process done in 4.5 hours.
That's good. I mean, it's a
Yeah, a little bit of improvement.
It was how many hours was it originally? It was like,
oh God, yeah, I don't know if I could do that in my head, but yeah,
totally. Okay.
a ridiculous amount. But yeah, so building that was directly applicable, and that also kind of opened my eyes and working kind of on the business side of it to the power of networks and people doing things for them. Because I'd be at the workspace, and someone might have a question, and I would go and help them for a while, and these people come around 2 years later and be like, hey, I actually think I might have a job you could look into, or I have this for you. And it's really cool seeing how that pays off. But there's also kind of a joy in just helping people for the sake of it. But yeah, so that petered out, and then towards the end, what was kind of the nail in the coffin was I got this nice letter from NASDAQ. They discovered us, and they're like, "Yeah, change your name, or we're going to sue the pants off of you for the rest of your lives."
Oh my gosh.
And I was in some negotiations with the lawyer, and then I had a lawyer in Tallahassee that was a really big part of the local ecosystem there, Jake Kiker, and he took it on for free and was like, "Yeah, man, unfortunately, the best we can probably do is just have you guys change the name." And then I started kind of the process of moving, and it just, unfortunately, we ran out of, funding and everything. So that just kind of petered out. But we still have the code. There's still hopes that we'll revive it one day, and people will be ready to trade Dink memes on the market.
Yeah, you changed the name, right? You have a new version.
Yeah, we switched to DankX for Dank Exchange because we wanted to keep that kind of that history of the DANQ sort of thing.
Yeah, it still feels like one of the exchanges.
Yeah, exactly.
That's good. Yeah. Cool. Through this process, as you're out there looking right now, how would you say the job landscape is looking right now? Like how's it different from say a couple of years ago? What's happening within the last couple of months?
Yeah, so I have the benefit of being in a tech hub now. So I live in Boston. The landscape is definitely different. It's not as, I would say it's not as vibrant. There aren't as many people hiring. Obviously, there are layoffs happening. Some big ones happened here very recently with like Toast and TripAdvisor. Some kind of obvious ones that would be affected by the
right
downturn that's happening from the pandemic. But, health tech is here. It's huge here.
Yeah.
There are a lot of areas that are still thriving, and it's still kind of a vibrant place to be. And then there's the increased acceptance of remote work. So at least as of right now, and I'm still like the very early stages. I'm pretty optimistic. There are a lot of very talented engineers that are out there looking for jobs right now, kind of in the same market and different ones. So, there's competition, but I still think, at least as of right now, there's enough room for people. And I think we'll see a lot of innovation. And I think that, we also are lucky in a sense to have a lot of the larger tech companies here that can more easily weather the storm. So, there's options. The startups are still there. A lot of them have frozen hiring. I work with a third party recruiter that got me the original job at Patients Like Me, Jamie Chafel. He's been amazing and a great guide to kind of the landscape in Boston, whether I've actually went with his roles or not. So Affectiva wasn't through him. I had a warm introduction from someone I worked with at Patients Like Me and I'm still very close with. It's different. Like even the leads I've gotten from him have been different. Not as much volume. Even on like LinkedIn, I see less kind of recruiter feelers being put out there. But I have seen a lot of people kind of coalescing around these like alternative ways of finding jobs. So, there are people that are on LinkedIn and their whole thing is like they like to do is act as a job board. And then I've also just from, the relationships I've formed over my career, I've had people that know really interesting people, founders and things like that, people doing really cool stuff in these really small startups that have been making it like wonderful introductions for me. And I think the ecosystem here is very much geared towards these kind of people that are really good connectors.
Yeah.
And I try to be that myself because if you're producing those connections as well as, making use of them when you need them, they strengthen. And to me, it's like this weird analogy to, how your brain works or something. Going back to my neuroscience background, you have this concept of Hebbian learning. If the more you use certain neural networks, the stronger they get and the more efficient they get. And so the more that, you form these connections, the more you work on these relationships and get to know people at a personal level and just make friends really, like as silly and as simple as that sounds, those people want to look out for you and you want to look out for them when times are tough for them. And we'll all come upon those times. I don't care how good of an engineer you are
Right.
or how, brilliant of an entrepreneur you are, you're going to fall on hard times. And having those people kind of in your corner that know other people that are willing to vouch for you and you willing to vouch for them if, that befalls them, that's like a really powerful thing. And with as vibrant of an ecosystem as we have here and the hits that it's taken, the fact that that's still happening and actually even I think more important now than ever is a really kind of optimistic thing for me. Like, you can kind of see how people are banding together and helping each other in the midst of all this uncertainty and fear and these difficult times. And it's super encouraging.
That's cool. I don't know, I had so many different kind of career paths, but part of it was in the kind of the music world. Basically every gig I got in, from being a recording engineer to a touring technician to eventually landing a job at a school teaching people about recording was all word of mouth, was all based on reputation and people talking about me and, building up those kinds of connections. And it takes work to get that to happen. And like you said, you got to, meet people and build those relationships, but also do work that, people would want to share it with you. And,
Yeah.
I hate to always say it, but it's like people need to like you.
Yeah.
There's people out there who just think that they're going to be the greatest, whatever, and it could be in the music scene or whatever, they're an amazing guitarist, but like nobody wants to work with them. Then they're not going to get hired. They're not going to be brought on board if they're going to be a problem kind of person. And I don't know if that gets shared very often in this world. Everybody, doesn't always think of it that way. They always think about, oh, well, the brilliant people. And it's like, well, actually, no, there's a lot of people out there that won't want to work with, somebody if they aren't a team player and want to be part of that and are into being, being part of a organization as opposed to being some kind of like soloist, all the time.
Yeah, exactly. And I think engineering is especially prone to this, I think completely false idea of like the lone genius
Yeah.
or like, you see the things about the 10x engineer and like you can't rest on that your whole career. Like maybe it'll get you through somewhere, for a little while, but generally if people don't want to work with you or intimidated by you and you're not someone that's giving back, Like you're not always going to be able to rely on being the smartest guy in the room or girl in the room. You don't want to be that. I mean, I think personally, like I want to be the dumbest person in the room because that's where I get to learn and kind of ramp up my skills.
Right.
But and also at the same time, like again, like you said, there is always a personality component to it, no matter what field you're in. But for some reason, engineering has the stereotype of, you know, the lone genius that doesn't need anybody and can be temperamental and all that. And you really can't be. I mean, I don't care what kind of organization you work for. Like some people will be like that, and I've encountered those people, thankfully, very rarely. And that's the other thing too. I don't think it actually bears out in real life as often as maybe media or stereotypes might act like it does, but it's still out there.
Sure.
I think I see young engineers that think that, you know, they're the smartest person at all times, and they don't necessarily understand maybe like the business aspect of things or the importance of that. I see it.
There's so many facets, man.
Yeah, there really are. And I see that there's a subreddit I frequent. Yes, career questions. That's mostly early career people. There's a lot of questions about like, oh, I think my management team is stupid for this reason. They're not, you know, this isn't the optimal solution for this and that. And it's like, well, you're completely ignoring business constraints and you're working for a business.
Right.
You know, it's not all objective, black and white sort of decision making. If it was, you wouldn't need, you know, managers, you wouldn't need product managers, you wouldn't need a lot of that. So I think that's something that if you're going to stay in the industry, like kind of you get disabused of that notion pretty quickly if you have it. But yeah, there's being able to just like know and understand people, be empathetic is something that I actually do see it more in this industry than I thought I would. But I don't think it's, you know, fully kind of where it should be maybe.
Yeah.
But that being said, like there are a ton of great people in this field and most people and a lot of the culture too, like that comes from open source software. And I think that's really been the guiding philosophy is one of being able to help and share knowledge and wanting to share knowledge for free and kind of giving up the ego of I am the best. And that's all there is to it. Of course, there are exceptions, but I think for the most part, people will grow out of that if they have that idea, or they'll end up leaving the industry frustrated because they think it's their way only. And that's not how it works in the real world whatsoever.
Yeah, I feel like Python, you know, the community around it is definitely one of the most welcoming and are interested in helping each other in general compared to some other, you know, languages I've seen in other environments.
Yeah.
And just in passing, you know. So I love that about it.
Yeah, I think so too. And I think part of it too is that, you know, it's on its face, it feels like an easier language. It's less intimidating for new people to come into. And so I think those of us that have been using it for a while, like we we see so many people come into it, and you know, you want to share the joy. I find a great satisfaction in programming. I find it calming and meditative and fun. I mean,
Yeah.
I enjoy programming. I know a lot of people like, oh, it's your job. Like, you know, you want to shut off when you go home. It's like, no, I have other things I want to build when I go home. I like building. Like that's just my thing. And I'm fortunate that my field is something that I enjoy doing for fun, and that it happens to be, you know, a fairly lucrative field. Going back to like the musician thing, I really feel for musicians because I understand that saying, like, you want to get your art out there, you want to create, and it's so much harder to do that as a musician. I'm a big music geek. I'm a big metalhead. I go to shows like all before COVID. I was going to shows like every weekend.
Wow.
I know a lot of the local bands around here, concert promoters, and it's a great, like, really loving big community here of guys that, like, you know, you wouldn't expect to be like that, but there's a really great like metal scene here. Everyone's super cool, but you know, you see these great musicians and you just see them struggle for their art. And I'm very thankful that like the thing that I really geek out about programming, you know, I don't have to struggle as much as other people do. Yeah, there's struggles and it's a difficult field to be in, but I never felt like I had to be the starving artist to be able to practice my craft and make beautiful code.
I tried starving for a while.
It's overrated.
I traveled the U.S. in my 20s in a Sentra
Nice.
Pickup truck and with like a little trailer, and you know, we toured the U.S. and actually, you know, played some of the places in Boston back in the 90s. And it was interesting times, but yeah, I I don't know if I want to say I grew out of it, but I definitely grew fond of, of having a paycheck and having other things coming in. And
Yeah, exactly.
I still want to share what I create.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. I think there's a lot of crossover there.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. And that part of the creativity process is still there. And I enjoy that part of it. How did you get involved with writing for Real Python?
Yeah, so when Dan first purchased Real Python from the original founders, he put out a call. I was following him. I think I'd just got Python Tricks, the book, and I'd been following him on social media and stuff and knew of him. I mean, his reputation kind of precedes him. And he put out the call for writers, and I was like, this is a great opportunity to kind of ramp up my own skills when I'm writing articles and sharing what I learned. I'm a very prolific note taker. Like every project I do, I have a ton of notes on it, whether it's like a single bug fix that I had to do or like I wrote up a whole new application from scratch. I try to keep notes on everything I do because I have a pretty terrible memory. And so writing about it really helps solidify it for me and making a narrative around what I did. And then I also have an archive so I can go back and be like, oh, hey, I did this 3 years ago. I forgot all about this. A case in point was actually the MongoDB aggregation pipeline stuff we talked about earlier.
Yeah.
I completely forgotten about that. And I was going back through my blog and was like, oh, I did that. I forgot all about
That
that.
was super cool.
Yeah. So I was already writing anyways. And I saw that and I was like, why not give that a shot? So I reached out to him. I sent some writing samples and we talked a little bit and I joined up and just started writing. And so, from basically the very beginnings, I was a part of it and writing articles. I started doing the technical reviews, which were a lot of fun too, because you get to see a lot of people's voices. And then for me, a lot of my technical review also kind of bled into the next step. So this is probably getting a little inside baseball for Real Python, but we have this like multi-tier review process for every article that goes through. And it's a very long and kind of arduous process. But if you look at Real Python articles versus from some other places,
Yeah. Stuff that you might find on Medium or whatever.
yeah, exactly. You don't have that same level of quality and communicability. I guess is a word maybe that could describe,
Sure.
the articles. We have all these multiple layers. So I do technical review, which is like kind of the first step of the editing process. And it kind of bleeds into didactic review, which is the next step where it's reviewed for how easy it is to communicate the concepts that you're trying to communicate. And so what's really fun about that whole process is getting to see an author's voice, especially when it's a new author, and how they integrate that with kind of the overall style guides that we have and seeing how they grow as a writer. It's been, really fun seeing someone that I reviewed when they first started versus now if they became a regular writer, seeing how it's grown, how much easier it has gotten to do their review. And it's super rewarding. Yeah. So I've been doing that since, gosh, I think early to mid 2018 was when I started again, right around when Dan kind of started this whole thing.
Cool.
But yeah, I've been doing it ever since.
So you have your most recent article is about pandas
Yeah.
and doing merging of data frames.
Yeah. Yeah. So that one was really fun, but also extremely difficult to write. Being like kind of the place I've sat at in my jobs lately is that as that interface between science and engineering. I use pandas a ton. My customers, my internal customers, science teams are like in pandas every day. That's like the framework to use for any sort of data analysis. And it's powerful and intimidating and there's just a lot to it. And so when I first saw it, I was like, okay, I can do this. And then comes the writer's block. I missed so many deadlines on this article. Thank goodness for Joanna and some of the other editors with how patient they were with me with that because, there are these articles that you know a little bit or a good bit about, and then you start delving deep and realizing there's so many more layers like you had no idea even existed.
Right.
And this was one of them. And it took a lot to finally get it out. But when it was finally finished, it was probably one of the more rewarding articles that I wrote because I ended up learning a lot from the process of writing it and from developing exercises and things to really hammer home kind of the concepts of merging. And, it seems simple on its face. All right, merging, it's database merging. Fine. Join. Okay, it's pretty much the same thing as that.
Right.
Concat. Okay, we're just plopping two things together. But then you start looking at all the different options and all the different use cases and how people are using those tools and how they're expressing their data with it. And it's like, oh, this is going to be a long article. How do I make it, readable for people and keep their attention, but also, help communicate the power behind it? Those sorts of articles are super difficult to write, but they're some of the most rewarding. And I think that's probably been one of the more popular ones that I've written.
You might say, okay, this is going to be similar to something that I have a background in, which is SQL, but
Mhm.
it in general, there's all kinds of weird little rough edges that you're going to run into just in general, how, Pandas indexes stuff is really kind of funky and unique.
Yeah, you throw in like multi-index and stuff like that into it, or in hierarchical indexes, and it's like, okay, I just made it more difficult by an order of magnitude.
Right. You kind of cover three key concepts of merging and then joining and then concatenating. I think of like most people starting with the idea of merging and using those keywords of like inner and outer and left and right joins and stuff like that. What are some of the key things you have to pay attention to?
Yeah, so with this article, I actually starting with merge is a very conscious choice in that I wanted to start with kind of the more difficult part, and this goes back to what we were talking about earlier of like kind of if you want to ramp up your reading abilities, you go beyond your level. And I think merge itself, whether you're doing it in Pandas, SQL, whatever, that's going to be like the more difficult one because there's so many different options. There's a lot of set theory behind it, which is why I wanted to start with this. I think, structure is such an important part of writing, especially when you're writing things to teach other people. I thought this was kind of the right way to go. Start with like the most difficult part of it. Because when you go to join and concat, it's like it's almost feels like child's play compared to it. So yeah, you have all these different options. So you have the inner, outer, left, and right joins. And when I see this, I always think of the Venn diagrams. If you look up like SQL join Venn diagrams, that's and I actually made some for this article to try to illustrate what the joins will result in. Because I think if you think about it that way, the whole idea of like an inner join versus an outer join or a left outer join
Yeah.
start to kind of become clearer. In the SQL world, it's never going to be clear because different of plain left join in SQL, if you're using like Postgres or MySQL or Oracle's PL SQL, all can mean different things. Plain like left join could actually be a left inner join or a left outer join, or it could actually, there's some weird things that happen. So at least in Pandas, you have like the vocabulary is just unified. Yeah, so you have like a lot of options with merge that allow you to do a lot of neat things. So in this article, a lot of the projects are kind of built around climate data from the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration.
Cool.
It's real world data that you can kind of play with and understand, and it becomes kind of easy to demonstrate the different types of joins you can do by using this data because it's super relational, which is really important when you're kind of putting together data sets, especially with merging. There has to be, some kind of connection, obviously.
Yeah.
So you can kind of really easily see the results of outer joins, a full outer join versus a left outer join, and when you're going to want to use those different things. And that's only one of the options. I mean, that's the most important one that I think anyone using pandas and merging data sets with it will encounter. Then the next one would be on like this tells if you want to merge on a certain column, make that your merge key, then use this index. Otherwise it will use, I think, basically every column that has the same name to merge on, which you don't always want. You probably don't usually want it. There's a lot of power behind all the options that are available to you, but with that power comes like, you have to be sure you have to know your data really well. And I think the examples that are used in this article kind of help with better visualizing what the results kind of look like without using data that, if you're not familiar with the data, you look at the results and be like, okay, yeah, that looks right. And it'll be like completely wrong. You just like use the wrong join. And you accidentally dropped like, 5,000 columns
Right.
or rows or something by doing an inner join instead of the outer join that you meant to do. And, you know, getting familiar with that sort of set theory and a way that you can actually apply in the real world, I think it pays off in spades.
Yeah, cool. I think that having a really good set of data, if you will, to start with is, kind of crucial. It goes back to what you were talking about with your, ETL stuff of, cleaning data and getting it prepared to do any of this sort of stuff.
Yeah, one of the things I actually struggled with in this article was finding a really good kind of clean data set to work with. I was kind of perusing data.gov, which is a good kind of jumping off point for data that various government agencies from the local level all the way up to the federal level in the US collect. And so there's a lot of cool data that are really fun to play with. There's like, traffic data, which is something that's super interesting to me, which is probably just from playing way too much SimCity growing up.
Sure.
But like traffic data and how that kind of maps to like, the idea of a graph is super cool to me. I don't know why, like routing things, infrastructure, pipelines, and that's probably why I instinctually like fell in love with data engineering are all like super fascinating to me because how you route things is so important at like every level of life. And so there's a lot of really cool data about traffic flow in data.gov, but finding two sets that have some kind of relationship that you can actually join on and demonstrate this with is a lot harder. It took me probably a good couple of weeks of, just looking at these raw CSV files and being like, "Is this?" And squinting at it, turning my laptop around. Like, can I actually do something useful and teach something with this?
Yeah.
Yeah, sure, I could build a cool project with it, but will it communicate what I want to communicate?
Right.
And that whole skill, like, I had no idea how important that skill was until I started writing for real Python. That bled into everything else in my career when it comes to mentorship and teaching others or even just showing my work.
Yeah, I agree with that too. It's like having concrete examples to share with, again, you're working in environments where you potentially have owners or managers or other people that are removed from the two teams that you're part of, which are, the scientists and your engineering data kind of teams,
Mm-hmm.
And then having to like share something that makes sense to them, that like, this is usable. This is why you should invest in this. This is why we should, put resources here, and like figuring out ways to communicate that is a whole unique skill set.
Yeah,
and by teaching it, it's like a huge part of it, kind of like going back to what you're saying with building in the article.
yeah. I mean, I think teaching is also one of the best ways to learn. One, you have to know whatever you're teaching very well, but the other thing that's really, I think, stimulating about it is the questions that you get. And this was one of the things I loved, even going back to grad school. Public speaking is like terrifying for me, being kind of an introvert and all that. But I forced myself to do it as much as possible because it's an important skill, but two, I actually absolutely love Q&A portions of talks. Whether I'm giving talks on things I've built or I'm building or on research I was doing back in grad school, that question and answer portion is one, that's where if you actually know what you're talking about. And two, it's really stimulating in that you're in a room with very smart people, whether you're giving a tech talk, science talk, whatever, that are interested in what you're doing. They're there to hear from you. And so that Q&A period is actually really fun. And we kind of get that with the comments at Real Python. They're saying,
True.
any sort of thing you put on the internet, don't read the comments. But the community is really, really great on Real Python and, very intellectually curious and wanting to know more about what you have to say. And that part of it, I think, reinforces the things that you learn on the whole path of either creating the material or just in your career from using it. And it allows you to kind of look at it from someone else's perspective and understand how, someone else might perceive your work.
Yeah, definitely.
And that's like super invaluable because the more perspectives you can kind of understand and empathize with, the better whatever you create becomes, I think. Because especially with coding, like I've always said this thing where, your code is communication, right? Like really good code can communicate exactly your intention to both the machine and to the person that's going to read your code, whether it's you 6 months down the line, another teammate, a new junior member of your team, or a manager or whatever. Code is always communication. I don't care how like optimized it is to communicate to the machine. If you can't communicate it to another person, it's worthless.
Yeah.
And so these kind of Q&A things with the articles or with talks, I think they help kind of refine your code as a craft that you practice as part of your life.
It's so exciting too. I mean, typically, like at the end of a talk to have actual people, they listen, they paid attention,
Yeah.
they're asking questions based upon stuff. It's kind of frustrating when you put something out there and then it's just silent.
Yeah, exactly.
It's very frustrating. So you know how well you're performing.
Yep. Yeah, I actually gave a talk back in October. Affective every year puts on this Emotion AI Summit, which is a really fun time. And I gave a talk about kind of the platform that you started to build out, which kind of was to manage our whole data lifecycle. So at Affectiva, we actually collected our own data. We have a warehouse out in one of the suburbs of Boston where we take people, put them in a car with all these cameras and stuff, drive around and, record how they reacted to things and find out when they're frustrated. So we'd collect this data and driving around Boston's really easy to get frustrated.
Yeah, that was one funny thing when we were there. It has to be the city that I've heard the most horn honking in the
Yep.
world. I mean, maybe not the world, but like in the US that I'd been to. And to give you a flip side of that, if you were to honk your horn in Hawaii, it's gonna be a fight.
Yeah.
No one does that.
Exactly. Yeah. I grew up, so I'm originally from this area, but I moved to a little beach town in North Florida when I was like 11. And it's kind of that same thing, right? Like it's very laid back. It's slow, a slow kind of life. That's kind of island life. And then on top of that, you're in the South where things are, kind of just slower and more relaxed in general.
Yeah, exactly.
And this part of Florida was still is culturally like a rural South area. And so, yeah, like honking and all that's like unheard of. Then you come here and like, if you don't speak the dialect of horns, you're not getting around well.
not in Boston yet.
Exactly. So, yeah, we collect all this like really interesting data. We have internal labelers. We interact with third party labelers to actually understand people's facial expressions so that we create this training data for the scientists to actually create the models that would predict, given a video feed of someone would track their face and predict what they're kind of feeling at the time as they're driving around. So we started building this like whole platform to manage this because it was kind of ad hoc and, the teams were kind of siloed off from each other, which caused a lot of slowdowns and all these problems. So I gave a talk on how we were planning on building that and like what we wanted to build, why we were going to build it, the struggles that we've faced and like how we were going to go about actually solving those. And when I got up there, I mean, I was super nervous for like the week beforehand. I mean, giving a talk is always, stress inducing, even more so when you've only been at a job for a couple of months and now you're talking about this huge platform that you and a couple of other people on this Tiger team are going to build. But I get up there and the room had filled in. I saw like as soon as I was about to start, my entire team had filed in. And that was something I got a little emotional because like I see all these people that I've worked with. Half of our, actually probably 3/4 of the team at the time was in Cairo, Egypt. And a lot of them came to America or to Boston for the conference. And I saw them all file in and, they enjoyed it. I had a lot of good questions from them and then from the audience in general, like people were super interested in what I had to say. And that's when, I think you can feel like your work and what you're doing is really validated when it captures that attention and that interest in people. And it's super rewarding, especially for someone like me that puts so much stock into what I build and what I create. It's, I look at it as like, it's probably the same thrill as, like you as a musician would have when you get up on stage and then after, people are coming up and talking to you about your music and, buying your merchandise and, all that fun stuff.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And, I see that same excitement when I go to a show and, I start talking to some of the bands I see or, I become friendly with a lot of the local bands and, their members and stuff. And, there's just this excitement that that I think anyone that creates anything gets. People like actually interact and enjoy and get something or just have any passing interest even in their work.
Yeah.
There's this connection that's made there that's just like super cool. And I think that's something that and you can probably confirm or deny this, like that's something that drives the artist or the craftsman to kind of sacrifice for what they create.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm already seeing it with the podcast, like
Yeah.
Putting out the idea of like, hey, I have the whole thing where you can ask a question and send stuff in and topics that I want to cover. And just even the handful of ones that we've received so far have been just so meaningful for me and Dan to look at, and we're like, oh yeah, we got another question. You know.
I was just gonna say it's funny because even little things like that, like interacting with the audience,
Yeah.
and I don't like saying the audience because it kind of others them, but like interacting with the people who are consuming and getting something of value out of whatever you're creating. I think for being on the other side of that as the audience, like for me being just a huge music geek and loving it, doing live shows and stuff like that, it means a lot to the fan or the audience to be able to get that sort of interaction and feel like they're heard by people that they definitely look up to. Like, I mean, for me with musicians and stuff, like I see these guys that are, you know, my age, maybe younger, maybe a little bit older, that I'm like, man, I like that stage presence, that creativity. Like I look up to that. You know, I think that means a lot both for the creator, but also for the consumer or the fan, to be able to have that interaction. Yeah.
Yeah, that connection. That's cool. So I have a couple regular podcast questions.
Yeah, sure.
What's something that you're excited about in the world of Python?
Yeah. So for me, like I've been absolutely thrilled just seeing how much Python has kind of grown and penetrated every sort of industry. So I see it very much by being kind of on the more research data science side and machine learning side of things. But Python is really becoming like this lingua franca, I think, of science in general. I mean, before you had like MATLAB and R and stuff like that, but I think Python's really like taking over there too. And it seeing a language that was once seen, and I mean, I've had managers express this opinion, like seen as this like kind of slow toy language for maybe prototyping things, and that's about it, to it being taken like really seriously at pretty much every level, has been something that's really exciting to me.
Yeah.
And also just seeing how it allows a lot more people to get into the field and discover like kind of the love of programming as a craft or as a pursuit. I think Python enables that a lot more than some other languages might, and it brings it to a lot more people. And just seeing that growth and people having fun programming is like one of the most exciting things for me. I'm really big on like mentorship and teaching, and also learning from those I'm ostensibly teaching. I think it's kind of it allows a lot more people in on this wonderful thing that a lot of us have access to.
Yeah, that's I think the reason so many of us are here. You know.
Yeah, exactly.
So what is something you thought you knew about in Python, or that you knew in Python, but it turned out you were wrong about it?
Yeah, so this kind of goes back to the idea of Python as the rapid prototyping kind of scripting toy language that you start something with and then use a more serious language to build the actual thing you want to build. Like I was completely wrong about that. I like just seeing the kind of advancements in science that Python has enabled by being a language that one has a lot of people that love it behind it. So like if you're working on something like PyTest or TensorFlow or Pandas, if you're kind of working away really hard at these more or less open source tools, you have to love the language. And seeing that that love and that interest kind of be expressed through these tools, and being able to kind of accelerate science that's being done, the pursuit of knowledge and understanding the world around us, ourselves, and seeing the role that Python plays in that. I was so wrong about Python when I first started using it as like, just a way to learn how to code in general. And I'm really glad that I was, because Python is a great language. Like I feel myself when I'm writing it, I feel like I'm talking, I'm just having a conversation like we are right now. I'm having a conversation with myself and my machine, and it's very easy to kind of get into that flow state that I think we all kind of strive for when we're working. And it's a wonderful place to be, and Python really enables that. And by doing so, and doing so in such a kind of accessible way, it's advanced so many fields so far in a fairly short time.
Cool. So this is a new one, something that came up on the Slack at Real Python the other day. And the person said, do you have a trick or a technique or a tip about Python that maybe some people are unaware of, kind of some hidden Python skills?
Yeah, I think I have two that kind of come to mind, and I mean it's not like they're I wouldn't say they're hidden. I mean, they're in the documentation for those of us who actually read documentation, which usually isn't me, but sometimes.
Right.
So the first one is kind of is more specific to pandas. I've seen it a lot in just code that I've read. There's a lot of times there's this instinct, just as programmers, like we kind of think in loops and iterations and things like that.
Sure.
And so with pandas data frames, there's this instinct. And I mean, I'm still very guilty of this myself to, iterate over the data frame and make the changes row by row and, all this. And pandas itself is actually has these very powerful tools where you don't need to iterate over a data frame. You can kind of, it doesn't matter how like specific the changes you need to make are. There's always a way in pandas to do things over an entire data frame kind of in one go without the slowness of iterating, or even worse, of having like nested for loops to kind of get to the data that you want. 9 times out of 10, you don't need to. There's a way to work across the entire data frame kind of in one go. So if you're someone that's working with pandas, whether you're new to it or old to it, and you're thinking of iterating through your data frame or any sort of data set that you're working with, chances are you actually don't need to. And I would recommend just like kind of digging into how to reframe the problem that you're working on to be able to make the changes you need to across the data frame as a whole. And then my second one is another thing that's not quite hidden, but the kind of advanced functionality of generator functions. I actually learned about these writing my real Python article about generator functions and generator expressions in the yield statement. So with generators, you get a few cool function, or I guess methods, because they're instance methods on your generator. So these are send, throw, and close.
Yeah.
And they let you do like really powerful, cool things. And as like a data engineer, I find, chaining together these expressions really cool. So, with generative functions, you can build a pipeline in just a few lines of code that will kind of basically be the same thing as an ETL pipeline. You can create an ETL pipeline in pure Python if you want to, using generator expressions. And then on top of that, like using send to kind of control the flow of your generator, using throw to throw errors when, some bad data goes in or something like that, or close. Using these, you can create coroutines and all this like really neat functionality that I think sometimes gets taken for granted because not a lot of other programs or programming languages have features that are comparable to generator expressions, and certainly not as easy to do as Python does. Like, just throwing in a yield statement or wrapping a comprehension in parentheses and sub brackets. It's a really simple tool that's easy to overlook. And as a kind of consequence of that, I think the advanced functionality gets overlooked as well. So I definitely recommend people to play with those, get a data set that you want to do a bunch of fun things with, and use generator expressions to do that in an efficient way.
Yeah, I enjoyed your article on that. I hadn't played around with that kind of functionality inside of it of sending and throwing, stuff out of it. So it's cool.
Honestly, like before that article, I hadn't either. I picked up the article on our Trello board, and I was like, oh yeah, I can do this. Like I use generator expressions. Like I get it. Work with a lot of data, so yeah, it should be pretty easy. Then I was going through some of the Python documentation and looking at more advanced ways of using generators because I wanted it to be comprehensive. I was like, I had no idea any of this existed. Like, you don't know what you don't know,
right?
Until you have to write an article that a ton of people are going to be looking at every week. And you want to make sure you cover all the bases. And then when you're coming up with a way to actually communicate how to use these things, it was really enlightening writing that article. It was one of those that I really had a fun time writing because, I thought I knew the ins and outs of generators, and then all of a sudden I discovered all this functionality that I'd never used before and could, put into use in my career. Oh wow, I didn't even realize these really cool features existed. So I had a blast writing that one.
That's super cool. Hey, I want to thank you for taking so much time to talk to me.
Yeah, I had a blast. It was a real pleasure to do this, and I think this is the first podcast I've ever recorded, so it's been a lot of fun.
Oh, that's awesome. Well, good luck with your search. I hope everything turns out good and you can stay working there in Boston.
Yeah, thank you. I hope so too.
Okay, cool. I want to thank Kyle Stratis for being my guest this week. And I want to thank you for listening to the Real Python Podcast. Make sure you subscribe to the podcast in your favorite player. And if you like the show, leave us a 5-star rating and a review. You can find show notes with links to all the topics we spoke about inside your podcast player or at realpython.com/podcast. And while you're there, you can leave us a question or a topic idea. I've been your host, Christopher Bailey, and I look forward to talking to you soon.